Thank you. Well, it's been a full day, and I was a little bit apprehensive about being the very last presenter in a conference like this, loaded with very interesting and informative material. So you have the printed version of the slides I prepared, and I may skip through some of those because the material has simply been covered very well by other speakers already. But as was mentioned, I've been in Korea off and on, starting for 2 years when I was 23, 24 years old as a Peace Corps volunteer. And then 15 years later, I returned as a Fulbright scholar. And then in 1996, I actually joined the Fulbright Commission and worked there for 14 years. So if you think in terms of a timeline, what happened between 1996 and today, it probably explains a lot about why my research interests were sort of regenerated just by being there and seeing the Korean people using their mobile devices and the networks and enjoying the fast networks here and so forth. So what I'm going to do is briefly talk about my interest in television and its role in Korea's development, then very briefly the rise of smart television and devices, because we've talked all day on that, and then end with some comments about television in Korea's future digital development. So compared with the other speakers, I'm stepping back and taking kind of a broad view of how Korea fits in the global picture of things. So my interest in television grew from televised events in the 1960s, my Peace Corps experience here in Korea, and then my doctoral work at Stanford in the late 1970s. Roll this video. Video 시작. 예, 좀 잘 들어보세요. 앞으로.
Glenn Eichel has that story.
And that's the way it is. Right?
For decades, Walter Cronkite defined broadcast journalism. If he said it was so, that's the way it was. If he was enthusiastic, we were enthusiastic.
The Eagle has landed.
Boy.
If he was somber, so were we.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
Cronkite became the most trusted man in America during a time when a single broadcaster's voice could change the course of history. In 1968, when he returned from a reporting trip to chronicle the Vietnam War, he determined the war could not be won.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
So I was in college at the time the Vietnam War was raging, and it actually explains how I landed in Korea as a Peace Corps volunteer. I was accepted into the U.S. Navy Officer Candidate School, but I was not really a fan of the Vietnam War, so I chose Peace Corps and came here to Korea. I wasn't thrilled when I learned that I would come to Korea because my image was of a developing, war-torn, still rebuilding from the damages of the Korean War. I didn't have a very good image, as I think many Americans at that time. So after graduate school, this was my first book, Television's Window on the World, a decade-long study of network coverage of international affairs. The second big era in television news started with the launch of CNN in 1980, 24-hour, around-the-clock global news. And this was big at that time, using satellites to connect the whole world. So I published, I was a university professor, publish rather than perish. And by 2004, the monograph I had written on global television and foreign policy was, I was here in Korea, so that was history. So I contacted them. They said, oh yeah, we'd like an update, the internet and foreign policy. And it was a natural thing for me to become interested in the Seoul Olympics, and I did research there and on the Barcelona. But then in the early 90s, thanks to an introduction by a Yonsei colleague, I started to do research with some funding help from Daycom Corporation at that time, and wrote this book on, actually it says the telecommunications revolution in Korea. It refers to the 1980s, which is how the Koreans themselves view the 80년대 정보통신혁명, the 1980s. And you'll see in my, so having been involved with the Seoul Olympics, I'm obviously interested in Pyeongchang. We'll come back to this later. Now, TV actually played a very important part in Korea's overall digital development. President Park Chung-hee, this is a picture of him visiting Berlin in 1964. He opposed color television broadcasting. He thought that it would exacerbate social divisions in Korea, and only the wealthy people in the cities would have color television. So you could not even discuss color television broadcasting as long as Park Chung-hee was president. But he, of course, was assassinated in 1979. And so what happened is that right up until 1980, 100 countries in the world, including leading Asian neighbors, were broadcasting in color, but not Korea. So, but Park Chung-hee knew that he wanted to invest in infrastructure. He had visited Germany, he had seen the Autobahn and the German steel mills. So he returned, and in 1970, Park Chung-hee personally supervised the construction of the first expressway in Korea, the Seoul to Busan highway. And Park Chung-hee actually used this as a metaphor. If you look at this remarkable map, this was published in the Donga-ilbo in 1970. It shows seaports, airports, expressways, but notice, the country is not divided. There's no DMZ. It's a unified country, and he used it actually as a metaphor for both development and eventual unification. In 1994, then Vice President Al Gore gave a famous speech to industry executives in Los Angeles. It was called the UCLA Information Superhighway Summit. In the U.S., not much happened. Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, the others listened to Gore, but really not much happened. In Korea, by then, they were ready to start building. So the Korea Information Infrastructure Project, which was the big fiber build-out, began, and it was completed in 10 years. This curve represents gross national income per capita in Korea. It's based on World Bank data, and I updated it through 2013 for this presentation. It's based on current US dollars, so the curve stays mostly the same but shifts a little bit. And back, as I said, in 1980, the photo above is actually in the 1970s, but I saw that with my own eyes. Very common to see long lines of people waiting to make a phone call. The teledensity was only about 7%, 7 lines per 100 population. But what happened is that Korea took a network building approach to building what is now called the ICT sector. Started in the 80s, but it included a very bold decision in 1993 to adopt CDMA. That was just a patent held by Qualcomm at that time. No one had commercialized it. So Korea became the first to commercialize it, and then Wibro became an international standard for mobile WiMAX and was big for a few years before LTE came on, and digital multimedia broadcasting, which you see in the subways here, started in 2005. But when the iPhone finally arrived in Korea in 2009, 2.5 years after its June 2007 introduction in the United States. It shocked Korea. I was living here, and I every day literally would open up the newspaper, Chungang-ilbo, Chosun-ilbo, Korea Times, Korea Herald. The big news was either iPhone shock or smartphone shock. The mobile service providers, they wanted to protect their voice revenue. They said, oh, we can't let the iPhone in. We'll lose all our voice revenue. The handset manufacturers were comfortable with their huge market share in CDMA-based phones, feature phones, which had been commercialized. You know, Korea was proud of being the first country in the world to commercialize CDMA. And the government also played a role. There was a WIPI software requirement that I'll just mention. I don't have time to go into it here. So smartphone shock, as I just described, is because although this country had, by the time of the introduction of the iPhone, it was a broadband leader. It led the world in fixed broadband. It had the best mobile networks in the world, CDMA. But the delayed arrival of the iPhone was an example of disruptive communication, innovation. I believe, if we think about it, iPhone is really a misnomer. The disruptive character of the iPhone is that this was a powerful computer with a touch screen that you could manipulate connected to the internet. So this is just one example from, I think this is from 2010, yeah, after the, of newspaper coverage of smartphone shock. Now, we've heard talks here about games, and these bars show the increase and then the decrease in 2010 of the number of PC bangs, or internet cafes, in South Korea. ThruNet, a company founded by the founder of Trigem Computer, introduced cable modem broadband service starting in 1998 at something like $25 per month. The government was still debating the price because DSL was coming along. ThruNet went ahead and entered the market with very inexpensive broadband, and so then the PC rooms started to proliferate because they could hook up to this broadband service. StarCraft became very popular with middle school and high school students. So when Hanaro entered in the next year, entered the market, they featured an advertising campaign aimed right at parents. It said, use a DSL broadband service in your apartment and your children won't stay out until late at night playing StarCraft in the PC bangs. It was massively successful. And the waiting line for installation of Hanaro broadband was lasted for months and months. When the iPhone arrived in 2009, the bar that's missing is just missing data. I haven't been able to track that down. But you can see that the game industry started shifting over to the mobile platform right away, and it's already had an impact. Now, in that desperate situation in 1980, after President Park had been assassinated the previous year, so the political situation was in upheaval, the economy was in the doldrums, a group of mostly U.S.-trained technocrats who'd gone to the U.S., gotten their PhDs, and come here, were brought into the Blue House by Kim Jae-ik, a Stanford-trained economist who later died in the Burma bombing in 1983. But he was admired by everyone, as nearly as I can tell, in Korea. And he brought in people like Dr. Oh Myung, who's widely respected in the field, and a group of industry, academic, and government people, the top experts, they wrote what's called the long-term plan to invigorate the electronics sector. And it targeted electronic switching, semiconductor industry, opening up with color television broadcasting, and in the biggest government reorganization to the history of Korea to that date, they took thousands of people out of the government monopoly Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications and created the Korea Telecommunications Authority, which years later became completely private and is now Korea Telecom. So those decisions made way back in 1980, I think the remarkable thing is, I didn't draw lines in here, but you can see they led to growth of the semiconductor industry, and the display industry, and the mobile industry, and networks. That little picture at the top is intended to represent networks. So they led to today's internet, what are called end systems, or hosts, and components and services. Samsung and other companies here export a lot of networks and network components. It's not just television screens. So Korea became a manufacturing and export leader and a world leader in broadband speed. I've talked to a number of you about Ookla.com. I found a recent MIT paper comparing the various services that actually measure broadband speed. And that paper singled out Ookla as being the best, most reliable source of real-time, real data. And you can go to the Ookla site and actually download historical data. But this is just a few days ago, and it shows that Korea was second to Hong Kong at 94.9 megabits per second. And the reason, and a few weeks ago, Korea was down at 80-some megabits per second. So what happened? Well, what happened is that during the ITU plenipotentiary in Busan, Korea Telecom announced, we are launching the gigabit network. And they started to launch it, and so the average figures have been going just up because KT is a major player in broadband. Now, this conference has been all about SmartTV. The problem, and this has been mentioned, but this is a Gartner forecast for the dollar value IT spending globally. And I'm pointing there toward the dark blue, third from the top. You know, that's all that devices account for. All the rest is software, data center systems, IT services, and so forth. So it's, and here's the Park Geun-hye video 시작해요. Yeah, this is the solution.
A creative economy harnesses the creative ideas of individuals and marries them with science and technology, with IT. It promotes the convergence of different industries and the confluence of industry and culture. And along the way, it creates new markets and new jobs.
Now, this president has an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from Sogang University, a very fine Jesuit school in Seoul. She also has language fluency in Chinese, in English, and some French, because she studied in France. And I have been following closely her public speeches. She spoke in Dresden, Germany, a couple of months ago, gave a major address. She's spoken to the World Economic Forum, she's addressed the U.S. Congress, and so forth. And her explanation of what is meant by the creative economy is quite persuasive. I think because of her engineering background, she understands digital convergence in a very broad context. Now, in Busan, that's one reason I just made the comment I did. She addressed the opening ceremony and said that the Internet of Things, interconnectedness, and big data analysis are precipitating the convergence of technology and industries. Thus, we have reached an inflection point in the hyper-connected digital revolution, a revolution defined by increasing connections, smarter connection, and faster connections. This hyper-connected digital revolution will lead to new converged industries and services. Now, before I came to this, I really wondered, where did this word smart come from? So it comes from actually German and Old English in the 1300s. It initially meant painful or severe, causing sharp pain, like if you have a cut or a scrape. And then it evolved in the 1300s to the notion of cutting wit or words, or a sharp wit. It's now very fashionable. We've got smartphones, smart TV, and I happen to come from one of the smartest cities in the world, Songdo, along with Paul, my colleague from the University of Utah. There are 3 American universities now operating in the global campus at Songdo, and 1 European university, Ghent University. But it's very smart in terms of the networks and the devices, and I think there's a larger vision of smart. But I think this conference has confirmed my notion that there can be many different, sort of at a general level, understandings of smart. It can mean internet connected, but it can also refer to the computing power of the connected device. A big data, of course, is part of this, and artificial intelligence, all topics that have been touched upon. And I think it can also be, in a sense, related to mobility. And this article from Science a couple of years ago is the first one that I'd seen that quantified. Basically, if you look from 1965, the blue shaded part represents the capacity for digital telecommunication. And you see by 1993 it's increased a tremendous amount, and then by the turn of the millennium it's huge. And this is from a different study by the same person, but if you look at the cross-hatched this part, starting right at the turn of the millennium, this is video, and there's video in 2007. So the first decade of the new millennium was just an explosion of video. Now I'm not going to show, I'm going to skip this video in the interest of time, but it's an Arirang television video about the OWL bus service, introduced last year by Seoul, and they base this new service, which runs during the wee hours of the night until early morning. They based it on analysis of more than 3 billion mobile phone calls, and it was immediately popular. Well, let's run 시작 이 비디오 잠깐 봅시다.
The Seoul Metropolitan Government has officially launched a new bus service that will be operating in the wee hours from midnight to 5 a.m. every day. While most are in favour of the so-called OWL buses, there are those who are not. Connie Lee has more.
It's a little past midnight, and the first night bus of the day is off. This N37 will be making more than a dozen stops before it ends its route at 5 a.m. Branded as the OWL bus, these night buses shine its OWL logo on the front and side to signal their nighttime duty. The city of Seoul is currently running 2 night bus routes in a trial run, but come Friday, 7 more routes will be added to the list, making it 9 routes in total. The trial run of the first 2...
Okay, you can see the pattern. Now, this is just a strategy analytics graph that I found that, look at, they project a very small share here for smart TVs. This is Internet of Things, wearables, and I think this illustrates a point that I'm going to make in a minute. Cisco has adopted the terminology the Internet of Everything, which I really think more accurately describes the broadly based convergence of media and channels and content and everything that's going on these days. You've got networking, people-to-people, social media is one big source of big data. Machine-to-machine communication, there's a lot of that that's going on right now out where I live in Songdo, and there's a lot more that is going to go on because Cisco has a big investment if for no other reason than that. But in Korea, I am projecting, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but I think that we've also there hasn't been a lot of talk about the robotics industry, but I think robots are going to add a dimension to networks and to television and to smart TV that is extremely important, and this country is competitively positioned to enter the global market for service robots and a whole range of networked robotics. In terms of people-to-people and social media, Korea got into this half a decade before Mark Zuckerberg even thought of the idea of Facebook. Zuckerberg was still at Harvard thinking about it when Cyworld was wildly popular. All the young people, almost everybody used it in Korea. And then smart grid is something that this country is well underway. The island province of Jeju has been used as a test bed, and that phase of it is sort of coming to an end, and it's going to go on, but it's a very comprehensive project. So let's play this video. I can't see it, so. Oh, yeah. Okay, because of time, I'm going to go on. That's the Nest Learning thermostat. Now to the conclusion of my presentation, because I want to end in 5 minutes. Okay, there's a lot of journalistic talk these days about the death of television. Just a ton of material. And this is in the New Atlantis. This article says the real issue is that viewers now have more choices. This has all been discussed here. And here's another one from Media Tech Law. TV is dead, long live the internet. My personal view is that TV is very much alive and will stay with us even after the convergence of all these multiple screens and multiple channels. So I'm going to conclude by suggesting that there are 4 major considerations in trying to look ahead to the future here in Korea. Education, okay. The first of these is education. It's the basic process of the information age. This country has pursued all types of education at all levels, formal education, cyber universities, broad public campaigns to teach computer literacy, and it's, okay, education is becoming, it already really is global in scope. I can't walk into the classroom without being aware that the same class I'm teaching is available on Coursera. And even the use of the library. I don't go there physically anymore. That's partly because Google has become the world's card catalog, and English is the dominant language for international education. Also, video is now a part of research. I skipped over there was a video on that slide of a Harvard chemistry professor saying that the biggest change in chemistry research in recent years has been brought about by YouTube. Because chemists, when they submit their research to journals, they're dealing with flows and chemical reactions and processes that need to be visualized. A few days ago, both Jim Yong Kim, the president of the World Bank, and Park Chung-hee spoke at a symposium in Seoul. And today happens to be the college scholastic aptitude test, the Sunung Siom in Korea. So this morning I got up here in the hotel, did a blog post to my blog with the title SmartTV, Smart Students. And it's about the fact that it just seemed to be too much of a coincidence that this day, which is huge in Korea and speaks volumes about the priorities of the education system, occurs on the same day as the Smart TV. So you can read the quote, but he talks about taking on new challenges, solving problems creatively, and so forth, will be important tasks for the vast majority of human beings in the 21st century. The increasingly global and service-based nature of the economic interactions and so forth. Now, those were his remarks at the symposium, and he distinguished between cognitive ability measured by IQ and non-cognitive measures of, so he gives credit here in this quote to cognitive measures, but then he says the personality trait of conscientiousness, and later some people call it grit, the ability to stick to, has been shown to consistently predict achievement in school and professional life. So, the president of the World Bank and the president of Korea, just a few days ago, were both zeroing right in on what they think is the major challenge for Korea in the area of education, to move away from the emphasis on today's exam, to move away from torturing your kids, the high school Kosam, the third year high school students, and move toward a more creative approach. Now, the second point here, Korea in the past has emphasized broadband, and President Park declared in Busan just not that long ago that there are plans to build a nationwide giga internet by 2017, and that Korea wants to be first with a fifth generation mobile by 2020. I would not bet against Korea, in case any of you are inclined to do so. I think they will achieve these. And I'm going to skip over Chairman Janikowski with apologies. He's talking about the global broadband race in that. And you can also think of television as part of the Internet of Everything and part of big data, but at the edge of the Internet of Everything. This bar graph, the red portions are smartphones. And so you can see, these are the Asia-Pacific countries represented in the bar graph. You can see that smartphones have become rather dominant already. More network devices equals more screens. And I think we've just seen the beginning of that. But smart also means intelligent. So this graph on the right is from Google, and it shows they've actually been applying machine intelligence to improving the efficiency of their data centers, and claim to have the most efficient ones in the world in terms of this power usage efficiency measure. Google is also doing what's called deep learning, and I like this diagram, but let's listen to Peter Norvig of Google. At the Singularity Summit. He'll talk here.
And so this is what we did. We said we're going to train this, we're going to give our system 10 million YouTube videos, but for the first experiment we'll just pick out one frame from each video. And so you sort of know what YouTube looks like. We're going to feed in all those images, and then we're going to ask it to represent the world. And so what happens? Well, this is YouTube, so there will be cats.
Right.
And what I have here is a representation of two of the top level features. So the images come in, they're compressed, we build up representations of what's in all the images.
Okay, sorry, you can find that video and view it, but they recognize cats, they recognize human faces, and it's amazing how the computers, without any human direction, just using algorithms, can recognize shapes and so forth. So I think the problem here is that software is going to drive future networks, as this McKinsey Telecom and Media and High-Tech Extranet article, you know, the manager or machine. And by the way, McKinsey talks about algorithms in the C-suite, but really concludes that human beings will prevail. And this is recent news here in Korea. Samsung has announced that it's going to broaden the criteria for recruitment of employees and not focus so exclusively on its own aptitude test, which used to be one of 2 or 3 measures, I believe. Now, leadership and public-private partnership is part of the, I'm going to skip through that, part of the equation. And this slide, you can look at it at your leisure, but what it essentially shows is that governments ranging from the military government of Chun Doo-hwan in the 80s to the democratically elected governments, both opposition and ruling party, have all supported major plans dealing with the ICT sector. So it's a consistency of long-term planning. And finally, this is mislabeled, it should say D, because the 4th point, culture and creativity enter in. Korea is one of only 3 countries in the world where Google does not have a majority and hefty search market share. It's Naver, and that's information on the left on Naver's dominance. On the right is a picture of a frog in a well, which is a concept that's talked about here in Korea, and what Koreans themselves would say, we've got to get away from this. And another example of this is browser use, but I'm going to skip over that. And so, in conclusion, I really like what the World Bank's president said a few days ago here in Seoul. Korea's lessons are lessons for the world. I would only add that the lessons include both failures and successes. So in my work, for example, with Dr. Oh, that's one of the first things he told me. He said, let's not focus only on the successes, but let's lay out the failures as well and why we failed. And I think the future of smart TV in Korea is inextricably linked to global trade, media event, and the impact of networks on all industries. It's a very broadly based revolution that we're living through. And I think most of all, software, content, and services, as the Olympics show. And this is Google Trends, and this is a search for Olympics. And you can see bing, bing, bing. Every 2 years, global attention, as shown by searches on Google, spikes. So this is also important for Pyeongchang. And in Sochi, you know, look at Twitter was the most widely followed by Facebook, and all the social media were heavily used. This is a network diagram, and this is where I live. When I take a shower in the morning, I can see that middle tower. They just dedicated it recently, and it's quite stunning architecturally. There's an Oakwood Suites up on the top. This is actually, on the left, is a shot of the SUNY Korea sort of area in the global campus. So thank you very much, and we may not have...
on time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Give him a back hands.